Hello and welcome to the Martial Arts Teaching Tactics Podcast. I'm Chris Bean, and I'm joined by Chris Kent. Hello, Mr. Kent.
Hello, sir.
Today, we're going to continue our discussion about lesson plans, specifically talking about drills and skills. When you're developing a lesson plan, be sure to disguise the repetition. If your students are doing the same thing every class over and over and over again, they will quickly become bored, they will lose motivation, and they will quit. You need to find ways to have the students perform the material without doing the same drill every single class. We're going to go through some basic tools to help you develop your lesson plan. I want you to think about these tools as a building block to your lesson plan. So you can interchange and remove and reorganize these different drills and skills to build your lesson plan. And really that's what the lesson plan all is you have these different building blocks and you just maneuver them around to different places and change up the order or the path that you choose to take in your class, and then that will do the work of disguising the repetition.
This also goes into what we talk about very often of putting your students and yourself even in different situations, different scenarios. If you just practice it one way every single time, as you said, they're going to get bored and lose their motivation, but then also they're going to be so accustomed to doing that one specific way. If they happen to be in a different situation or different scenario or different setting, it's going to feel abnormal or strange to them, and they might not be able to perform the way they need to. So this also helps with not only their motivation and their focus, but it helps put them in those different scenarios. So we're not simply training in that vacuum. We're being set up for success by practicing many different ways and many different types of exercises.
Yes, sir. So the first building block is moving up and down the floor. Moving up and down the floor, you would have their students perform their techniques moving forward, and then they turn when they get to the end, and they would go back the other direction. This is common when doing hand or foot basic techniques. If you're consistently doing the same order of moves, you can vary or change up the order, and this is important because I'm sure you don't want the students to memorize the path or the order that each combination or each technique is in, but change that up. And so if you're calling those commands in Japanese or Korean or whatever your art style is, I'm sure you want the students to know what that term or that terminology is. So if you do it in the same path, the same pattern every single time, they're perhaps not necessarily knowing what those individual words are, they just memorize the pattern. And so switching up the pattern from time to time or coming up with a couple different variations of that pattern will help to cause your students to kind of think on their feet and actually know what those terms are, as opposed to know and can think ahead and figure out what the pattern of the moves are. Another way to do this, very basic tactic, is to have them do one move all the way down the floor. Then they would turn, and then when they run out of room, they would come back with a different technique, or you can have them do the same technique. Of course, this would lead into a more physically demanding type of class, because that's going to greatly increase the number of times they're moving up and down the floor. So instead of doing, one technique per side, and then the next technique, one per side, you could do one technique all the way down as much floor space as you have. They turn around and they do a different technique all the way back. Or you can have them do that same technique all the way back. Again, that would increase the physical demand of the class, because that's going to increase the amount of times they're doing that move, and they're moving from one end of the floor to the next doing the same move. So you get to see lots of different times of them doing that move, but also they get to do it lots of times. So that's good for repetition, also good for, again, a physically demanding class, because they're going to be doing a lot more output in that style.
Good for new moves, or good for specifically stressing a certain part of a move. Because if you're doing the same thing continually, as you do it, say, okay, do your low block, and then specifically focus on your stance, focus on the width of your feet, the length of your feet, the way your hips are moving, or you're doing that new hand technique. Like you said, it gives you the repetition to really drill that new technique, so they have the repetition, they have the practice in learning it. A good way to kind of up that and, again, to stress the specific parts, whether it be a new move or one they already know, doing it all the way down, all the way back. And of course, like we're talking about for all of this, it's something you don't want to do all the time. If you always do it that way, that repetition and that monotony is going to kill them. But in specific scenarios from time to time, it can be beneficial.
Yes, sir. You can even change it up by having them do, you say go one time, and instead of them doing one technique or even two techniques, one per side, you would say go one time, and they would just continue going all the way down the floor. So instead of going in one, wait, they would just go and go and go and go and go. So more of a rapid type succession. Again, this is just to give them a different opportunity, different circumstances, different stress level to place on those techniques. And of course, again, you do it this way, this is going to increase the output. It's going to be more physically demanding for your students as well. And again, this would lead, that up and down the floor type of training would lead to basic hand foot techniques. Can you think? I can't think of anything else that would kind of happen in those.
I mean, if you're just dressing a stance too,
Sure.
you could walk up and down the floor with that stance, but it really is kind of localized to basic hand and foot techniques, things that you normally do moving forward or backward, depending on what's happening. I mean, forms have their patterns, and
yeah, I suppose if you had a pattern or a combination of foot techniques or a pattern of hand techniques, they could do that same style moving up and down the floor.
Yeah, I mean, kickboxing combinations could be done up and down or sideways or on the floor, depending on how you want to do it. But it just depends on it can't really do a self-defense situation up and down the floor per se. However, I mean, I'm sure you could figure something out. But I would say it's more localized toward hand or foot basic techniques, yes.
So the next building block in your lesson plan are line drills. Line drills are great for learning new technique. A line drill is when you have a line of students with an instructor leading that line in front. The students will move through the line performing their new technique on that instructor one at a time. So whether they're hitting pads or their instructor is grabbing them or whatever it is, they're doing that with a instructor or a leader or a team member, a junior team member. Somebody is in front of them and they're all moving through the line and they're doing their technique when they're at the front of the line. When they're done, they move to the end of the line. Again, the reason that line drills are great is that it allows instructors to give immediate feedback to the students. So they do the move, they can give that immediate feedback, and then also if it's a self-defense type move, they can kind of help to pull or push or help to move their body through that self-defense situation as well. And again, this is really good when they're first introduced or they're first doing these techniques.
I think complicated techniques are also benefit greatly from this line drill, because I have that one-on-one interaction with the student, and I can, if I need to, move their body or really explain the details as they're doing it to me. That's one thing to have them do it with somebody else or with a different leader, but when they get to actually do it with you and you have that one-on-one close physical contact, it's helpful for complicated techniques or when you really need to cover those minute details. So like you said, the new techniques or just complicated techniques, I think, is another thing that benefits greatly from line drills.
Yeah, and you could do this when they're hitting pads. You can do this in a self-defense type situation. You can do this as they're doing. They come up to the front of the line. They do whatever their new hand technique is, their basic hand or foot technique. Then they go to the end, and they can be hitting pads with that. They can just do it in the air. And then that, again, gives you that time that you can watch them, just that one person, okay? Oh, awesome, Johnny, awesome, very good. Give them 5, boom, they go to the back. And then again, not only does that mean that you get to watch them do it, but then you can give the feedback, you can give them encouragement, boom, they're done, they go right to the end of the line. Of course, there's a few things to watch out for as you do this. Of course, you don't want the line to be super long, right? Because if you have too many people in your line, then it's a time waste because they're just waiting in line that whole time, right? So you have to be kind of careful with that. One way to kind of help, maybe if you're short-staffed, is you put yourself at the front of one line, and then next to you put a student in the front of their line. And so what'll happen is your line, you just continue on through. They do the technique, they go to the back. But with a student in the front of the line, let's say student is at the front of the line, the next person in line does the defense or does the technique. And then after they do the technique, they become the line leader. And then that person that was the line leader goes to the back. And then they are able to filter through, and everybody gets an opportunity to do the move, and everybody gets an opportunity to be the line leader. And so that is kind of nice. Again, when you're kind of short-handed, you can have them go through the line that way. Now, what I would recommend in those situations is you do your line, get through, make sure you can see everybody, Okay, everybody's got feedback, everybody knows what to do. Then you would switch, and you would then put your eyes and watch the next line, the line that you haven't seen yet. And then that line that you were just at, they would do that line drill, cycle through with an instructor or with a student at the front. So the student would go to the front, the next student would do the move, then they would switch and cycle through. I don't know if I'm explaining that well enough. Yeah, I'm doing hand motions, but if you're just listening to this, that's not helpful. Also, my hand motions are just eccentric circles, so I'm sure that doesn't help either. And I think an ideal number of people per line is about 5, right? And so if I'm going to be the line leader and I have 5 people in my line, that means one person is doing something and 4 people are waiting. Now, this depends a little bit on how involved the movement is. How long does it take to get through the movement? Because really, I don't want these 4 people to be standing, waiting, doing nothing. Now, there are some things we can talk about in just a second here about what to have them do, but I would say on average, I want about 5 people in my line. Now, if I'm short-staffed, I can have that other person, the other student to be the leader on the next line or the line next to me. An alternative for that is I have one line in front of me with 5 people in it, and I have another line with 5 people right next to that. And so in line number 1, the student comes up, they do their defense. As that person's going to the back, then I move to line number 2. They do their defense. As that person's going to the back, then I move to line number 1. And I cycle back and forth. Again, this is not an ideal situation, but if you're outnumbered, if you need that extra time to watch and they're not quite ready to do those moves yet with a partner, that would be one thing that you can do. So as that person gets finished with, in line number 1, for example, they get finished with their technique, they're moving to the back, you move to the next line. They do their stuff, they move to the back, and as they're moving to the back, boom, you go to the next one. So you're jumping back and forth as they move to the back and they switch out. Again, that isn't a perfect situation, but it does help to cut down the time spent waiting as opposed to going through all of one line and then go through all of the next line. Just an extra kind of pro tip for you. Now, when your students are in line, you can have them be doing some exercises. For example, they could do jumping jacks or squats, leg lifts, whatever it is. You can also have them working whatever technique it is that you're practicing. So let's say I'm practicing a side kick. I'm holding the pad for the side kick. They come up, boom, they do their side kick, maybe 2 or 3 times, and they go to the back. Well, at the end of the line, maybe while they're in line, they're practicing a side kick, but of course they're not kicking forward because there's a student there. They'd have to kick side to side. But again, they're practicing that motion as they're in line. So instead of standing stagnant waiting to do something, they're active. They're doing something. If you're doing a self-defense move, so perhaps a little bit harder for the students to do that while they're in line. So maybe in those situations, they come up, they do their self-defense move, they go to the back. That's when they do their physical, their jumping jacks, their squats, jogging in place, something like that, just to get their body moving and continue moving, so they're not again just standing stagnant, waiting for it to be their turn. The next building block for your lesson plan would be partner work. Partner work should happen when the students are moderately competent with the material, or your class is just too big to do line drills. The reason this is important is you will not be able to see each person perform the movement. You're not going to be there to give that feedback right as they go. So that's why it's important for them to have a little bit more time spent practicing that move before you give them a partner to work that on. So for partner work, you could still be working on their basic hand and foot techniques. Let's say they're working on a low block and middle punch combination. So you've done it going down the floor. You've done this with a line leader. Maybe you've done it with a line leader and they're hitting a pad. Now they're going to do it with a partner. And with partners, at least the way that we set this up is we have everybody do what's called center line. And so center line is kind of what it sounds like. They find a partner and they line up down the center of our room, right? So and we've kind of set this up and showed them how to do this early in the classes, so that by the time they get to the intermediate class, the advanced class, the black belt class, we can just say center line with a partner. Boom, they know what to do. And again, they know where the center of the room is, so they find a partner, and one person stands on one side, the other person stands on the other side, and they have a partner, and they go all the way down. Then because that's a little bit too congested to do partner work in that situation. Then we do Zigzag. Zigzag is exactly what it sounds like. One person moves to the left, or one team moves to the left and one team moves to the right, all the way down. And so now they've systematically found a partner, and then again systematically separated and spread out from everybody else in their class. So now they have an area to work on with that partner. And again, if we're working on that low block middle punch combination, they're going to go back and forth on that low block middle punch combination, doing the same moves, but they've done it up and down the floor. They've done it with a line leader. They've done it with a line leader hitting pads, and now they're going to do it towards a partner. So they do low block middle punch. My partner does low block middle punch. I do low block middle punch on the other side. He does low block middle punch on the other side. So we're going back and forth, working on these now with a partner, same moves, same, nearly the whole class so far, we've done the same thing, but we've done it in different situations, different scenarios, and that's enough of a breakup, enough of a change that you can continue moving and working on those things, and it's going to be not the same exact thing for the students. It's going to break up that monotony, disguise the repetition enough that they can continue doing that without being bored of doing the exact same thing over and over again.
Like you said, one of the best scenarios to use this in is with a big class. As we talked about before, we want to minimize the downtime. So if you're a line drill, if they're not able to do something while they're waiting, or even if they are, it can kind of get boring or monotonous after doing it for a really long time. So having the partner work, they're always doing something the whole entire time, as we're able to move and kind of watch the whole class as it is as a big group. And then we can move from each team to each team and check and see how they do things as we make our way through all the different teams and groups that are happening. One side note from me about that something I've struggled with is I tend to make my way through the groups very slowly because I'm watching each person very intently, and making sure they're doing everything correctly. And it just eats up so much time, because if I spend 30 seconds on each person, well, let's say I have 12 teams. 12 teams is 24 people. 30 seconds 24 times is a lot of time that's going to be taking me to watch and do all that. So even within those partner work things, as you as the instructor, as you're watching things and kind of working around, you don't necessarily have to watch every single step of every single move that every single person is doing. You can kind of glance around and look for those red flags, or the sore thumb sticking out when someone does something wrong. Walk over, fix it, and then find a new vantage point where you can kind of see everything and be able to watch everyone at once and then address those issues that you see come up. So there's different ways that you can kind of use partner work to your advantage, but it can also work to your disadvantage. So knowing how and when to balance and focus your time and energy as part of making partner work efficient and effective for you and for the students' training as well.
Yes, sir. So moving on, the next building block to your lesson plan are stations. Stations are a great tool when you have a group that's too big for you and your staff to handle in a normal class, in a normal class structure. It is also a way to get the students to be moving around the room, which will get them more involved with the information you're teaching. And as well, it will break up that monotony because they're doing different moves in different areas of the room. So it's like they're moving from one small little room to another small little room and another small little room. So they're moving around, and that's going to help to break up the monotony.
It's just that change of location can make a big difference, even if you're doing the same thing over and over again, or if you're doing different things in different stations. Just moving around can help to break that up. I think about it, you sit and do computer work for an hour. Well, if you get up and walk around for 5 minutes, when you go back and sit down, it's going to be completely different for you. And that's a whole other thing about being still and moving around. But again, that change of scenery, kind of taking a step out of the situation and then being put back into it or in a different location can be a huge refresh. It could be nice.
Well, I think what he's saying is it will help to break up the monotony. It'll give your brain a little bit of time to rest in between before you get refocused on whatever work it is. Then you give your brain a time to break and rest. Then you get refocused on whatever it is, especially like you talked about if you're going through, and this is, of course, a side note a little bit, but if you're doing computer work or whatever it is, you want to have maybe half an hour of deep work and then go and do something else for 5 or 10 minutes, then come back. because trying to focus for, however length of time is going to be too much at one time. So giving your brain a small break, a reprieve in between will help to double down and allow you to continue to focus. And this is what we're doing with the students, where we're having them focus on one thing for, let's say, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, whatever it is they're in that area. Then they get 30 seconds or whatever. They move to a different zone, a new area. Boom, they focus in on something else. They get a short break in between, then they can refocus on whatever it is. And that's just a beneficial tip on using your brain efficiently, whether it's on computer work or you're studying or you're doing martial arts class. Having that work and then a reprieve, and then work and reprieve is super beneficial to getting and maintaining that focus.
Yeah, and talking about stations in the classroom, if you're able to have the staff and put one staff member at each station to be there to overview and look at them as they're doing their things, or if you don't have the staff, or you only have a partial number of staff members, put a higher belt in charge of that group and have them watch and kind of overview what's happening. The nice thing about that is then you have eyes on each station, eyes on each student as they're training to be able to help with any questions they have or correct any mistakes that they might catch. But then also when it comes time to switch stations, you have that person there to help facilitate the flow of the switching and reminding them where they're going, reminding them what they're doing at their new station, as well to help the flow of that whole drill run a lot better.
Yes, sir. So stations, we've talked a little bit about it. Let's dive in a little bit and fine tune what are stations. Stations are when you set up areas for your students to go and work on specific movements for a specific time allowance on that information. You could set up one station for your students to work on their kicks, and then they would move from there. Then they work on their hand techniques. Then they have another station where they work on some combinations that involve their hand techniques and their foot techniques. Like you said, place an instructor or a higher ranking student at each of those stations that will help to give those students feedback. It'll help to continue the energy output from those students, but also it will help to facilitate how and the direction they're going to be going for those switching. Now, for this, of course, you want to have a time limit for those. So let's say if you have 2 minutes at each station and you have 30 seconds in between. So you have the students do work for 2 minutes. Then the timer goes boop. You have 30 seconds for that staff member or the team member to be facilitating, okay, listen, you guys move over to this station now. Remember, you're going to be doing this. They get to that new station. They can spread out. They get ready. Boom. Then they go right into whatever that other station work is. Stations can be used with any age group. For a regular class, you can have the students spend a handful of minutes at each of the stations. You can even do this for the entire class. So let's say maybe you have 10 minutes at each station. They would do their hand techniques at one station. Maybe they do their foot techniques at another station. They do a new form at another station. They do self-defense at another station. And they're in each station for 10 minutes or so with a leader there giving them feedback or giving them information to work on. And then once they've completed all their stations, their class is done. And we have taught classes like this in the past. And I'll tell you what, it is a refreshing change of pace for both the staff and for the students, because it's so different, so far outside of what you do on a normal basis that the class goes so fast. And another benefit to this is, let's say Master Kent is the person in charge of forms and I'm the person in charge of self-defense. As the students go through those stations, the only thing he has to focus on is what's in his station. The only thing I have to focus on is what's in my station. The benefit for that is when testing comes by, not only do you know who did what part of each of their curriculum, but you can go to that person, hey, listen, how did Johnny do in this? Because it's not that they saw one belt level, they saw all their belt levels do just their whatever specific focus is. So this allows you and your team to be very specifically focused. So my specific focus for maybe the whole quarter is self-defense, and his specific focus for the whole quarter is forms. And then perhaps at the change after the testing cycle, we would switch, and then he would do self-defense and I would do forms or whatever the other areas of instruction are. Again, it's just a very refreshing change of pace. Not that you have to do a whole grading cycle like that, but if you did a handful of classes, again, both the students and the staff would be like, wow, that was the end of class. Okay, great. Good job, guys. Let's move on. Just something different. Again, it's all about disguising that repetition, and doing station work like that it definitely disguises the repetition.
We'd mentioned before too, to make sure if you make switches like that, to wait for the end of your curriculum. So don't in the middle of your cycle change from one student or one instructor per belt group to doing stations every class. And I mean, if you do it for one class or whatnot here and there, as long as it's communicated well and or executed well, it's not a detriment. But you don't want to switch your entire curriculum or class structure around right in the middle of everything. And like you said, the nice thing is if you have someone who specializes in one area of teaching, you know that they are going to be, the students are in good hands, because that instructor or that person is able to do that very well and communicate that thing very well. Of course, over time, like you said, we want to switch it up and continue to be learning and improving our skills in every area. Even if we're good at that one thing, we don't want to only focus on that and just be the one trick instructor, so to speak. So being able to work on that, improve that, with being able to help our students and our strengths, is going to make us better as a team and better as personal instructors. And, having that focus. Let's say I'm good at forms and I'm not good at self-defense. Well, I do forms for a little bit, and then next quarter I do self-defense. That's a long time for me to hone and refine my skills in teaching that self-defense. So not only is it going to be beneficial for the students to know who it's coming from, and have the chance for me to know what happened every single class, because I'm always doing that one thing, it's also going to make me better and more well-rounded as an instructor to be able to do that thing and have so much time to focus on teaching that one thing.
Now, with stations, you have the rate at which the students would change in between those stations. I would call that the cycle rate. That's one of the variables that you have at your disposal that you can kind of play with. If the information is more involved, of course, you need a longer time spent at those stations so they can learn those moves, those more involved moves or combinations or whatever that is. Make sure you allow for that extra time to get through that information. Even though you may spend a little bit more time at each specific station, again, let's say this is like the whole class is done in stations, okay? Even though you may spend more time at each specific station, the class will feel as if it went quickly still, because they're only going through that information one time, right? And again, it's going to be so far removed from what they do in a standard, basic, normal class that will be a welcome change of pace. Another angle to take is to spend less time at each station, to go through each area 2 times. So instead of spending, let's say, 10 minutes at each area, you do 5 minutes. And what this will do, like we talked about previously, is that will give them the time spent for their brain to focus on that. Then they can think about something else for 10 or 15, 20 minutes before they get back to that station. Then they can focus again on that. And having that time spent on whatever it is, focusing on, let's say, hand techniques, and they go do something else. They think about something else. They worry about something. They focus on that. Then they come back. That is a huge help in getting them to remember and recall that information. Spend some time on it. Do something else different. Then go back to that area. Again, will be very beneficial in getting your students to recall whatever that information is. Whether it's hand, foot forms, do something. And you could do this. Let's say you spend 10 minutes at the beginning of class on their new technique in their form. Then you do the whole rest of the class, and you go back and you touch on that again for another 5 or so minutes at the end. Again, that will give them, that be the same type of thing where they focus on it, they do something different, they remove themselves from that situation, they go back and refocus on that. Super beneficial for remembering that information. Of course, if you have not done a whole class cycle like that where they spend 10 minutes at each station, be sure to prep your staff, your leaders, on what's going to be expected of them, what's going to be happening, how is this going to work, What's the benefit of doing class like this? Let them know all of those things up front ahead of time. That way, when it comes time for them to be there doing those moves, they have an idea of what's going to happen and what the benefit is and why they're doing it that way. Don't just say, okay, we're going to do this today, and the leaders are going to, figure it out on the fly. That is certainly not the right way to go about that. So as we round down the drills and skills area of your lesson plan development, this is all about disguising the repetition. That is the key for the success of your students and for the success of running a efficient and productive program at your school. Getting the students to do the same moves over and over and over again can be boring. So try to switch up the variation, switch up the situations they're doing those moves in so they can do those same moves, but they can still be fun and exciting and done in new ways. Be creative with those to disguise the repetition. Of course, it's all about being repetitive. Do the same thing over and over and over again. You're going to get really good at that. But for students, especially the younger ones, they're going to be incredibly bored, tired. They're not going to have the same level of output with those. So switch those things up. Do them in different areas, different ways, different parts of the room with a different leader. That will be the key for the success of, again, for your students and for your program. Sir, do you have anything to add for drills and skills?
No, sir. As always, this is what we do. This is what we have done for a long time. We found to work. We're not saying it's the only way. We're not saying this is an exhaustive list of all of the drills and skills that we can practice and use to our advantage. But those are some main ones that we use very often and that work well for us in our program. So, of course, if you have anything else that you utilize in your school or you do differently, we'd love to hear about it and try it out for ourselves. That way we can continue to grow our program and continue to make ourselves better as well. So, this isn't A to Z, everything you can do with your students, or A to Z, even everything that is possible. It's just some basic outlines and basic things that we use in our lesson plans to help disguise that repetition and get those drills in and get that practice in.
Yeah, and if you heard some of these different drills and you want to try those out for yourself, give us feedback. Let us know how it went. What did your students think of it? How did that improve your class? Let us know. It would be great to hear about the success stories you've had from using our different tactics that we've had. And as always, if you have different ideas or some topics you want to hear us talk about in the future, let us know. You can do that on YouTube, I think is the best way. Also, you can reach us on Reddit and Instagram and Twitter. YouTube? I think I said YouTube. Facebook. Yep. You can reach on all those and give us some ideas for some future episodes, different tactics or topics you want to hear us talk about. And you can find us at all those at MA Teaching Tactics. MA for Martial Arts Teaching Tactics. Until next time, I'm Chris Bean.
And I'm Chris Kent.